Morning, legends. Tuesday morning. What a week for it. Now, first of all, before we even get into the content of this video, we did a giveaway on the weekend and that is now closed. If it's one of these numbers, I'm going to block this on the actual thing. So number 7, K.O. Connor. Ripper name. Epic. Number 23, Hobby Jogger. Hobby Jogger, what a legend. Now the other day, someone left this comment that absolutely fascinated. It was by a guy called Steve, and he said, needing a rest day, and then in brackets, or a deload week, or a taper, etc., is a sign of overtraining. And I said back, you're probably right, maybe not so much for the taper though. And he said, the fact that the taper works proves the point. If the runner were not overtrained, the taper would cause a decline. So today, we're going to talk about rest days and if you need them and the signs of overtraining and what overtraining even actually is. And if Steve is correct, which, you know, spoiler alert, I think he is actually correct. So let's dive into it. By the way, I ran 8Ks, but, you know, no one cares. See you guys at lunchtime. Must be a full moon today. Also, apologies about losing the moustache a little bit. I had to cut it down because I cut it in a little bit too far when I was in the shower. And I started to look a little bit like, you know who, so I had to just shave it back. It'll grow back. It's going to be okay. The moustache will be back. Now, let's talk about what rest is actually even for to begin with, before we even talk about overtraining. So the idea behind rest is that you put some sort of stimulus into your body and you have a period of adaptation where your body rebuilds whatever you broke down. And this process can take, you know, any length of time depending on how much fatigue you actually put into the system. So you could think about this on like a daily process or a weekly process or a monthly process. It all generally makes sense. And the question that I have is, where do you draw the line in terms of what rest period is too long, and that you would consider that if you need that much time to recover, you're probably overtraining? That is the question that I have. Where do you draw the line? Now, all this is really interesting stuff, and here is kind of my opinion relating to this kind of thing. I feel like rest days are fine for most people if you're trying to be conservative and you're trying to increase your chronic training load over time rather than just focusing on a daily thing. You know, I take rest days, not necessarily because I need to, more so because it helps me to just make sure that I'm not starting to overtrain or getting too far ahead of myself. You don't know how much is too much until after you've actually gone too far. And I think the conservative approach of taking rest days preemptively rather than reactively might actually be very, very important and probably an underutilized skill. That is my thought number 1. My thought number 2 is that most runners actually train way too hard as it is. And this is where I tend to agree with what this guy was saying in the comments, because, you know, people put themselves in fatigue holes during training like nothing else and nothing I've ever seen in any other sport. Like, people really bury themselves in running every single week for years on end for literally no reason other than they just like feeling like they've put in the hard work, when realistically we look at the best athletes in the world and they just focus on consistency over time rather than getting yourself so fatigued that eventually you have to take, you know, deload weeks or, you know, have extensively long tapers. You know, that stuff is really interesting to me. Thought number 3, I think there's also this thing that people do in running where they consistently make their training harder and longer and, you know, slowly banking mileage week after week after week, or prep after prep for these races. And actually, if they were to just do the same prep 4 or 5 times in a row for like 2 years, they would consistently get better anyway without having to continuously ramp up their training over and over and over, because they're kind of losing that minimum effective dose and they're gonna lead themselves into overtraining. Now, what's interesting about running is that everyone has different perspectives and opinions, and I absolutely love it. I love these concepts that people kind of come up with in their own head to explain certain things, and I love the different opinions that people have. So I'm going to give you my opinion now, not just on a longevity perspective in terms of not overtraining, but also a fitness perspective. How can you actually get fit? So I'm going to explain to you now exactly how you can avoid any kind of overtraining, and I like to call this the edging method. Some of you guys will understand this method immediately just by the name itself. Now, what most people tend to do with their training is that week to week they make it harder and harder and harder, and they chase PBs in their workouts and their easy run paces and all that crap over and over and over until eventually they get injured or they get really tired and they have to take forced time off reactively, okay? Proactive versus reactive. Also, while I'm here, I'll just show you the little gym setups. These are kind of everywhere in Australia. They're like these little gyms that are just body weight, and they're just kind of all over the place. Oh my God. What the hell? This one's actually good, but I think I've just overtrained myself. Yep, definitely overtrained now. The show muscles. Oh my God, you can only do the bottom half. Wait, can you change? You can change the resistance, look. So here is the edging method. The idea is that you spend a certain amount of time not making your training any harder. You're just getting to that edge where you don't know if it's gonna be your limit or not, but it's pretty close to what you can manage. You're just gonna edge a little bit for a certain amount of time, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, and then you take a forced recovery period, whether it's a couple of days or a week or something, so you can recover, and then you edge again. So you edge, pull out, edge, pull out. That is the idea, okay? Like me, for example, I've not really ran consistently for the past year, okay? And I've just strung together 12 weeks in a row of training, okay? And I've not got past 35 kilometers just yet because I've been continually improving week to week at around that 35 kilometers per week mark. And I've continued improving, and I've not needed to actually make it any harder yet because I'm just edging a little bit. And I'm probably gonna take a rest day at some point, probably after my procedure tomorrow. I'll probably just have a little rest period just to recoup, and then I'll bump up the training a tiny bit, okay? The worst way, in my opinion, that you can train is to continually be adding in something every single week, whether you add more kilometers, add more intensity, because you can't do this forever. The reason why you're gonna stop doing that in 10 weeks time or so is because you're gonna be absolutely cooked. It's not sustainable. When Elliot did his 159 project, okay, the first attempt he did one sort of training block, and the second attempt he did the exact same training block again because he didn't need to make it harder. The training was going to get him the goal. All he had to do was just continually stack up the same amount of training load every single week, okay? People have this fascination with making things harder and harder and harder, and that is where resting has to come into play, and having rest weeks or having long tapers is when you've pushed way too hard and you have to ride that super compensation for a long period of time, and that might not necessarily be the best. I only need 35 kilometers per week right now to improve my fitness, and it's been 12 weeks and I still can probably stay at this for a little bit longer and continue to get fitter. Me going from 35 to 40 to 50 to 60 in like a 6-week block wouldn't really be that effective for me because I'm right now already improving on the little amount of training that I'm doing. So why would I continue to make it harder? People want to make their training harder and harder and harder, and you can't do that forever because that's when you start to get the systemic fatigue, the hormonal issues. You start to hate training. You start to get really bored of training, okay? The 3 things that I look out for in my training is my resting heart rate, my HRV, and how motivated I am to get out the door. If those 3 things are all in line, it's highly likely I'm not gonna be overtrained. But if I'm starting to really hate training and really struggle, wow, the sun's just come out. There you go. And starting to really struggle to just get myself out of the door and get my shoes on and go run, then it's probably highly likely that I'm starting to tiptoe and I'm starting to push past that edge, okay? Here's what I would do for most people to sustainably improve over time. Do a 6-week block of training and keep it the same throughout the whole time, okay? Then take a week deload week, okay? Proactively deloading, and then bump up the training the tiniest amount and do another 6-week block, and continue to do that over and over and over, and you will find that you will get super fit. Now, do you need to do rest days? I think so. I think rest days can be quite valuable for most people. I take rest days simply because, you know, I would rather just run 4 days a week on the volume that I'm on right now than run 7 days a week, but have to run like 4 kilometers. That would just be annoying for me, you know, logistically, having to do the washing and stuff like that. I'd rather just run 4 days a week. But that is a big plane. I don't know if you can even see that. But it's all about the minimum effective dose, not continually just making your training harder and harder and harder, not chasing PBs weekly, not trying to increase your easy paces weekly, just relaxing, running to effort, taking rest days when you need them because you've gone a little bit too far into that edging, okay? And just thinking long-term, slowly about your training, okay? I wanna hear what you guys have to think or have to say in the comments below. Thank you. Tomorrow is my procedure day, so I'll make a little video about that. Should be pretty exciting. Hopefully, this just completely fixes my problems in every single way and I can finally start running 120 kilometers per week next week after running 35 this week. Hopefully, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye.